Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is April 1st, 2022. Happy April Fool's Day. Try not to get in too much trouble today. But anyway, amidst various pranks, jokes, and various other forms of mischievous whimsy, I have decided to dust off the Sockdem Gang series. This is where I watch videos from what I've termed the Sockdem Gang. Basically, my method is to go to Kyle Kulinski, Secular Talks channel, click on the Channels tab to see who all else he is linking to, people like Jimmy Dore, the Young Turks, people like that, and then skim through their recent videos from the last couple of weeks, see if anything grabs me as far as being able to contrast their non-Marxist takes with more of an actually socialist Marxist perspective. Now, doing this is extremely hazardous to one's mental health. I would not recommend trying this at home. And indeed, it's been several months since I have embarked on one of these little journeys, but I felt that it was finally time and I could finally give it another go. So this weekend I've pulled some clips from Kyle Kulinski, David Pakman, of course, Tom Hartman. I feel almost bad for Tom Hartman, but yeah, Tim Black possibly, David Dole, and Joe Rogan. So we'll see what we get to before I just collapse due to just extreme frustration. So let's begin with a Kyle Kulinski clip. This one is titled AOC's Warning to Dems. We're in Trouble, the Kyle Kulinski Show. So I almost covered this exact same article. It's from New York Magazine. It sounded interesting as far as, AOC bucking the party, although of course in a very limited way, obviously worthy of criticism. But then I actually read the article, and maybe there's a few mentions of that. Mostly it's just sort of a commercial for AOC. So I didn't think that there was that much substance to it, and I commented on this in the live stream from Tuesday. But anyway, let's see what Kyle Secular Talk Kulinski has to say about it.
So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spoke to New York Magazine, and she took some shots at Democratic leadership. Let's take a look. This is the headline here. AOC's warning for Democrats. We're in trouble. Let me show you some of the article. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thinks President Biden got played by Senator Joe Manchin. She doesn't think that. It's a fact. And that the president's nostalgia for a bygone era of backroom deal-making could prove disastrous for Democrats in the midterms.
All right, let's pause here. It's a fact. Is it a fact that Joe Biden got played by Joe Manchin? Or is it actually a fact that the Democrats played us all, Biden and Manchin both being in on that scam? So the basic issue with the Democrats is they have been around for how many decades now, and they have been allowing the country, in fact, they've been working hand in glove actively with the Republican Party to basically descend the United States and every area that it touches, which is a lot because the United States basically controls the levers of the global economy, down to like the 10th level of hell, or as close as they can get it. Now, the Democrats, or let's say a political party in their general position of prominence, has a choice. They can keep doing this brinksmanship, keeping the country poised on, I used to say on the brink of fascism. We're probably over the brink at this point, by tolerating the Republican Party the way that they do. As the saying goes, if U.S. politics were for real, one party would pass universal health care and wipe the other off the map permanently. So basically, the Democrats have a choice. They could ally with the left, who, we've been suppressed for how long by every means at the disposal of the ruling class. And that's kind of the issue here. The donors of the Democrats and the Republicans, huge money, big capitalists, that's the issue here. It's not really one party over the other per se, because yes, there are differences between the Democrats and the Republicans, but generally they're both controlled by the same class, the big capitalists. Of course, in capitalist society, particularly advanced capitalist society as the United States is, there are two great classes. The big capitalists, what we call the bourgeoisie, propertied people, This class is great because although they are small in number, they are great in wealth. They control almost everything. Industry is privately owned by them, and the government is owned by them, and they control the stuff. They control the resources. The other great class is the working class that does not own capital, otherwise known as the proletariat. We are great in numbers, not in wealth. So these are the two great classes. As capitalism advances, more and more people in the population get sorted out into one of these two classes. As far as middle classes, the petty bourgeoisie, people who do not own much capital. They own some capital, but not nearly as much as the big bourgeoisie. Remember, it's something like 75% of the stock market is controlled by 1% of the population. That's what we're talking about. So yeah, it's true that about 50% of the population owns some stocks, stock being one form of capital. But the vast majority of that 50% that owns some stock, which includes people who own one share, don't actually own enough to make any appreciable difference over the way that the economy is run. So, the petty bourgeoisie, small capitalists, are not a great class. They're neither great in numbers nor in wealth, and they have to align with either the big bourgeoisie or the proletariat to get anything done. So anyway, the Democrats and the Republicans both are fundamentally controlled by the same class, the big bourgeoisie, the very rich, ultra-rich capitalists. Though, of course, both parties also make appeals, political appeals, to the petty bourgeoisie and the proletariat as well. However, don't be confused by these appeals. They do that to keep up the illusion of choice, the illusion of democracy, when in fact, things like the Princeton study on democracy have shown that there is no correlation in the United States between public opinion and public policy. However, there's a strong correlation between donor opinion, the moneyed interests that control the parties, and public opinion. So basically, voting doesn't really matter. Another thing that the study on democracy told us is that in 95% of the cases, elections are bought, in the sense that whoever spends more money on the election wins the election. And that varies. In Senate races, it's closer to 80%. In House races, I think it's higher. It's closer to 100%. And then, overall, the average is like 95% of political races in the country are just bought. They're controlled by who spends the most money. Therefore, basically voting matters in 5, maybe 10% of races, something like that. So let's think about this. The Democrats and Republicans are basically controlled by the same class, which has a certain set of interests, which is established by their relationship to capital. It flows from the fact that they own capital. So that gives them a certain set of interests within capitalist society. They want more capital, basically. And how do you get more capital? Well, capital is multiplied by applying labor to it. This is where the working class comes in. If capital wants more capital at the lowest cost possible so that they get maximal profit, the working class is supplying that labor, and we want to be paid as much as we possibly can get for it. So, antagonistic interests. The capitalist's loss is our gain. Our loss is the capitalist's gain. That is class conflict. So, what do? People who have become aware of these class antagonisms become, in other words, class conscious, and then engage in class struggle. The capitalists know this because you don't hang on to power by not being class conscious. They are quite class conscious, and in fact they try to prevent us, the working class, from becoming class conscious of our status within this system, capitalism, so that we don't struggle effectively against them. So that's effectively what's happening here. Now, electoral politics are just one form of class struggle. There are many forms of class struggle, but they really don't want to give us anything that they don't have to give us, and denying us sort of electoral avenues of class struggle has been pretty easy and effective. For example, getting people to believe that the Democrats represent the working class. I mean, perfect, because they don't. So you get people who are somewhat class conscious trying to support Democrats to, get working class interests passed and advanced in the legislature. Well, it's totally ineffective because the party is controlled by capitalists, again, who have interests which are diametrically opposed to the working class, and so that's who they're going to help. That's the tune that they dance to at the end of the day. So going back to this whole, conflict between the Democrats and the Republicans, it's largely a puppet show. That's why nothing fundamentally ever seems to change. Both parties represent the same class. History primarily is class struggle. That's how things change. So if you have a system of electoral politics that don't represent any real class struggle, then that's not going to be a force that changes history. So going back to this idea that if there was anything real in US politics, then one party would enact universal health care, which of course is in the interests of the working class, significantly less so in the interests of the capitalist class, and then would wipe the floor with the other party, since again, the working class, much greater in number, therefore would easily wipe out, in an actual fair election, the party that wasn't standing for that. But the reason that it keeps teetering back and forth between the Democrats and then the Republicans and then the Democrats is because neither party is really doing things for the working class. Therefore, the working class doesn't turn out, et cetera, et cetera. And then, a lot of the working class that does, there is election fraud as far as people being kicked off the ballots illegally, particularly people of color. So again, anything that can keep the electoral politics system teetering between the Democrats and the Republicans, that works out great for the big capitalists because nothing ever really changes. Now, the Democrats have the option to ally with the left and take up, for example, the Bernie Sanders slate of popular reforms, which is similar to the Green Party's slate of popular reforms that they run on, and the PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation. They also, the PSL also wants to end capitalism eventually, which this is a broader discussion we'll have maybe later in this video. But also, as an initial transition sort of platform, again, broad slate of popular reforms that would be skewed towards working class interests. So the Democrats have this as an option. They definitely could get rid of the Republicans permanently. So if some of the valid criticisms that they make, such as that the Republicans are extremely far right and they're turning into a white nationalist party and all that stuff, if they really wanted to act on that, they could ally with the left, enact these broad popular reforms, shatter the Republican Party into a regional party with no real hold over national politics, and basically sweep the Republicans into the dustbin of history. But then they would have to contend with the left as a force in electoral politics, and it probably wouldn't be long before the Democrats in turn lost to the left, because US politics are so far behind the times, they're so skewed towards the capitalist class. The Democrats would be identified with that. The left would say, we want to actually do things for working people, and that would be that. So they need to keep the Republicans in the picture. And remember, again, that's why the capitalist class props up both parties, so that the left never gets a fair shake. So that's where we're at. So as far as Joe Biden getting played by Joe Manchin, no. This is part of the overall dog and pony show that is completely rigged, completely fake, represents just one class's interests, while, claiming to be for the working class. Both parties in a way do that. You get sort of in the Republicans, the Tucker Carlsons pretending to be, the populist perspective, quote unquote. And then the Democrats, of course, doing their thing in the myriad ways that they do it. So recently we had a situation in the Democratic Party where Joe Biden beat Donald Trump on a whole host of promises. Joe Biden was running on the public option. He said he wasn't for Medicare for all, but he was for a public option. That at least was on his website. What have we heard about that since he got elected? Nothing, of course. $15 an hour minimum wage. They all said they were going to do that. Pelosi, Schumer, etc. And they allowed that to get held up by two people, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Now, if you believe that they really had no recourse against these two people, then I'm sorry, but you're a total sucker. They didn't want to do these things. They didn't want to do Build Back Better. They don't really want to do any kind of reforms. And so they use the rotating villain, Manchin, Sinema, as their excuse for not doing it. And they will keep doing that as long as it works, as long as people keep falling for it. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The fundamental task of the U.S. left is to break completely with the Democratic Party and with all capitalist parties. Unfortunately, the largest third party, non-Democrat, non-Republican party, is the Libertarian Party, who's arguably worse than both of them put together. They just haven't had the power yet to show it. We need an actually left party that represents working class interests, and we need to do whatever it takes to build that, whether it's a coalition of existing parties, whatever it is. And of course, electoral avenues are just one method or one line of class struggle. But you need the party, you need the organization that is free of corporate control to, get people together, to strategize, to come up with ways that we can do that. And you're never going to do that in a corporate controlled party like the Democrats. You're never going to do it. What you can do within the Democratic Party is get people who think that it's just about winning a certain number of elections or electing a certain number of people. These people want to overlook the fact that the Democratic Party is controlled by capitalist money and always will be. And they think that, if they just get enough people in, they can squeak some legislation through. It's not really how this works. We need across-the-board militant class struggle aimed at broad popular reforms in the short term, and then when it becomes clear that capitalism will limit those reforms and basically capitalism has to be abolished in order to get all the reforms that people need and to make them permanent, then you rally support for actually ending capitalism entirely. But yeah, the Democratic Party is never going to be the think tank for this. So what they're trying to do is put a Band-Aid on this system. It's not really going to work. They don't really have a long-term strategy for socialism. It's much more about trying to bandage and salvage the current system. And this is naive at best, because as the system becomes more and more wounded, it gets more and more violent and desperate, and that's just bad for everyone. So yeah, did Biden get played by Manchin? No. AOC is wrong. Kyle Kulinski is wrong. And we're off to a super great start on Suck Dem Gang weekend. I think I made it about 2 sentences into this video before I had to go on a 15-minute explanation of background principles. Let's resume the video.
Again, a fact. Sitting in her campaign office, she says this matter-of-factly, she's correct, as if bucking the explicit orders of her party's leaders, up to and including the President of the United States, is not that big of a deal. But it is. Quote, as a younger member of Congress, the first vote I ever cast was for Barack Obama, who was called a socialist, and all of this stuff. All of this rhetoric that we see today has been the political reality of my entire life. And so I never felt nostalgia for something that never really existed in my lifetime, she told me. Quote, I feel like our politics has fundamentally changed. Whether it's for the better or for worse is for people's determination, but I was never under the illusion that we can bring Manchin along. Ocasio-Cortez was one of only 6 Democrats, including Representative Jamal Bowman of the Bronx, to vote against Biden's $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill last November. She reasoned, correctly it turned out, that severing the infrastructure spending from Biden's much larger Build Back Better proposal would allow the bigger bill to be killed in the closely divided Senate by the defection of 2 conservative Democratic senators, Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. This is the first time any major publication has acknowledged that the progressives were right on that, to withhold their votes and try to keep them together. I have the utmost respect and confidence in the president. Wrong. But I just felt like we called 2 different plays on this one, Ocasio-Cortez said. I think that there is a sense among more senior members of Congress who have been around in different political times that we can get back to this time of buddy-buddy and backslapping, and we'll cut a deal and go into a room with some bourbon and some smoke, and you'll come out and work something out. I think there's a real nostalgia and belief that that time still exists, or that we can get back to that. But those days, she says, have been over for a long time. And the fact that Biden and others don't realize it, she says, could spell disaster in the fall's elections. With Biden's low approval numbers and the historic tendency of the president's party to lose, on average, 26 House seats in the midterms, the Democrats face an uphill battle to keep control of Congress, a situation that requires firing up the party's progressive base, Ocasio-Cortez said. Quote, we need to acknowledge that this isn't just about middle-of-the-road and increasingly narrow band of independent voters. This is really about the collapse of support among young people, among the Democratic base, who are feeling that they worked overtime to get this president elected and aren't necessarily being seen, she said. Ocasio-Cortez and the other 97 members of the House Progressive Caucus are calling on Biden to issue executive orders to enact environmental protections, lower healthcare costs, cancel federal student loan debts, and expand protection for immigrants.
Okay, pausing. Before Kyle gives his thoughts on what AOC was quoted as having said here, I'll give my thoughts on what AOC was quoted as having said. Then we'll listen to Kyle's. Then we'll see where there are differences, if any. Probably there will be some. So AOC said a number of things about, this time of bipartisan deal making never existed in my lifetime, and Biden's failure to realize this is endangering the whole party. So there's sort of two thoughts there off of that. One, if there ever was actually this other time, then why was it different then versus now? And I would say that to the extent that there used to be more of a sort of social democracy or restrained capitalism, fettered capitalism, as sometimes they say, which arguably gave rise to the golden age of social democracy in the United States, basically like the 1930s through the 1970s, after the New Deal, but before the neoliberal counter-revolution. Well, why did that happen? Why was that ever different? Why did we have those reforms? Why did the capitalist class, go along with it then, but they're not going along with it now? Well, I would say that basically you had a much stronger, more militant labor, socialist, communist movement in those days. Whether it was the domestic labor movement, which was capable of doing enormous strikes that could actually really paralyze industry, or whether it was the international revolutionary communist movement that established the USSR, which cut capitalists completely out of, all the resources in Russia, Central Asia, etc., and had the stated desire to mobilize the international working class to do the same wherever they were, to do revolution, basically. So this, let's say, kept the capitalists on their toes. However, after a certain point, and we'll point to the 1970s broadly, the capitalists decided, at least the hardliners among them, decided, hey, why don't we try to roll all this back, basically confront global socialism in every way that we can, really try to bring down the international Marxist project. And we got neoliberalism in the United States. Of course, the United States never had a workers' revolution. It was always under capitalist control. But it was around this time, like, for example, in the Reagan years, starting in the early 80s, that there were major assaults on labor rights, and that was the expression of attacks on workers' power here. And then, of course, there were attacks on worker power in worker-controlled countries. And, the USSR, for example, and the Eastern European countries that were socialist, they were brought back under capitalist control, their resources and labor put back on the free market, quote unquote, and worker power was broken. Capitalists moved back in. So basically for the last, 30, 40 years, the international working class and the U.S. working class have been existing with kind of broken power. Labor union membership has been in decline since about 1960. Socialist governments have been brought down one after the other. And capitalists are riding high. They are confident. They are feeling empowered. They have gone to extreme lengths to salvage their system, to snatch it from the clutches of the large, impoverished, property-less working class that their own system created. Capitalism creates the proletariat. It proletarianizes the population. And this triumphant capitalist class does not feel like making concessions. There are also arguments that due to the falling rate of profit over time, they can't afford to do this, but let's just leave it, at least for now, that they don't feel politically like they have to make concessions. They have broken worker power. It's very much a case of, what are you going to do about it? So as far as AOC's statement that this sort of bipartisan, social democratic era didn't exist in her lifetime, that's accurate. She was born after that. There were still some vestiges of that system when she was growing up, and there's still some vestiges of it today. But the decline is very real. This is like, even in countries, the United States does not have universal health care. But even countries that do have it, like Canada, for example, it's been under attack. And in the UK, you see this too. The attacks on the NHS, trying to privatize it, defund it. It's basically the battle cry of the neoliberal era. Defund, deregulate, privatize. So whatever your starting point, the US didn't make it as far as some other countries. Therefore, as these rollbacks have happened pretty much across the board, places with less of a safety net like the United States have ended up in a real bad place because cutting what you had, well, if you didn't have as much to begin with, that's going to be pretty awful after the cuts. So as far as, that never existed in AOC's lifetime, yeah, that's accurate. Why was it ever different? Stronger workers' rights movement, whether that was, revolutionary socialists, whether it was militant labor activists, oftentimes one and the same thing, with, of course, different degrees of success, different high water marks at their peak of success. Okay, accurate. But as far as, Biden's failure to realize this, no, this is this false narrative that Biden is some sincere actor here and just, poor progressive Biden got played by deceptive Weasley Mansion. No, Biden is from the conservative side of the Democratic Party. He didn't want to do these progressive reforms. This is all a big excuse. And by, giving credence to that narrative, you are basically helping the party that is arguably most standing in the way of mounting an effective opposition to all of these things. I mean, not only do the Democrats run this deception that they're actually opposing the Republicans, but they're constantly picking off and attacking the left in various ways. Co-opting left ideas and left energy is one of the ways that they do it. I mean, AOC herself is a manifestation of that. I mean, this whole idea of like AOC has confidence in the president, as she said, that basically goes against everything that people elected her for. Why would you have confidence in Biden? He is a right-winger. You should be fighting him. You should be bringing the ruckus. That is why people elected you. Now you are running cover for Biden and contributing to narratives that basically say he's this, poor, helpless victim. Ridiculous. AOC here is actively aiding the class enemy of the U.S. working people, which brings us to the quote about the collapse of support among the Democratic base. Yeah, people don't like this. It's not popular. Biden was installed as the presidential candidate at, great cost to the Democrats' credibility over the reform candidate, Bernie Sanders, who, of course, also, like AOC is doing here, rolled over for his good friend Joe in the end. But the idea is you had a lot of people in the Democratic base who are very excited about, hey, we need to make a lot of changes. And of course, the Democrats will, at the last minute, if not sooner, find every way that they can to not follow through on that in the end. Finally, I think it's worth noting there are 97 members of the Progressive Caucus in the Democratic Party. How many of these actually talk about things like Medicare for all with any frequency at all? In fact, I did a video on that a while back. Bernie Sanders was kind of the only one. He's not even technically a Democrat. The Medicare for all bills got all kinds of co-sponsors, none of whom were actually advocates for the thing. They just wanted their name on the thing for the next time that they ran for president so that they could more effectively lie to people about what they were going to do once they were in office. So that's my take on the quotations from AOC here. I think that she is actively trying to deceive her base into thinking that, basically that the Democratic Party, as headed by Biden or as headed by anybody, but especially as headed by Biden, is, genuinely trying to fight for the people and, oh, they got played by Manchin and, Biden better wake up. No, these are all conscious acts of a party that stands for the status quo and will use every means at its disposal, along with the other party that their backers fund, the Republicans, to fight any kind of substantial change. The only way that we can really get around this is by escaping the Democratic Party, building a party of the left. I mean, I would be in the left wing of that new left party for sure, but whatever it is, it needs to happen. Yes, it will be a struggle. Yes, it won't be easy, but working within the Democrats will never work, either for electoral politics or for the broader class struggle beyond that. So let's turn it over to Kulinski.
The thing that she's calling for here is absolutely, at this point, the only Hail Mary pass that Democrats have to not get shellacked. It's their only out. Their only out is Biden, break out that executive order pen and make a real change with it. Not some minor executive orders that are tweaks around the edges. Break out that executive order pen and eliminate student loan debt. Eliminate it. Legalize marijuana, which you could do through executive order. Just take marijuana off the Schedule I substances list. If he wants to be meek about it, move it down to 2 or 3, but in reality, you just take it off of the list and boom, you effectively have legalized marijuana in the country. There's a bunch of stuff he can do through executive order. He can lower prescription drug prices. He can expand healthcare during the COVID pandemic. To not do it is basically shooting yourself in the face if you're Biden and if you're the Democrats. So AOC notices that. And apparently her and a bunch of progressive caucus types are calling on Biden to do the executive orders. But I will say this. It's not enough just to call on him to do it. You know, I would meet with the president and have a band of a dozen badasses who are willing to take hostages and steal the Tea Party tactics. And so if a left caucus goes to Biden and says, listen, man, we'll block everything you're going to do from now for the rest of your time in office. Years. We don't care. We're going to block that. Unless and until you start signing real executive orders. Free every nonviolent drug offender. Whatever. Make a list of 20 things. And there are 20 things he could do through executive order. Do it. And then the ball's in his court. And now he can go and whine and cry to the media. And maybe the media would come after the left caucus in a situation like that. But my guess is he doesn't want another problem on his plate, man. He doesn't want another problem on his plate. And if he has a mutiny among his own ranks, he's going to get his ass in line. Now, maybe you give him a list of 15 or 20 different executive orders and say, we're demanding all these. Maybe he doesn't sign all those. But that's when you cut a deal. And that's when Biden says, look, I'll do these 8 executive orders. And those 8 executive orders not only are good for the country, but then are also good for the electoral chances of Democrats who are absolutely getting draxed right now in the polls. Democrats need to win by like 5 to 7 points nationally in order to hold on to their seats in Congress. They're down 2 points. I mean, it is going to be an absolute bloodbath, man. And so she's actually trying to help, even though she's, phrasing it like, look, I'm against you and you should do it. No, she's like, this is going to help you. You should do it.
Okay, let's pause here for a minute. Kyle's closing comments are about 9 minutes, and that was about 3 minutes, so maybe I'll break these into like 3 parts and do commentaries on, rather than breaking in every other sentence. Anyway, first note here, I can't imagine still watching this stuff. I stopped watching this a while ago. In fact, it was in large part, maybe 50%, my desire to create content that was better than the SOCDEM gang that led to doing Socialism for All, as well as a desire to get more theory out there and to read more theory myself. But to just go beyond, raising the bar. I can't imagine still watching this, going around and around in the loop of, elect better Democrats and democratic electoral politics and all this kind of stuff. I can't imagine. Anyway, so as far as the Dems getting shellacked and Biden doing executive orders, so I think that the major thing Kyle is maybe not understanding here is that the Dems' purpose is not primarily re-election. It's protecting capitalism. They are part of a system, a con basically, good cop, bad cop. They're the good cop. Republicans are the bad cop. The job of the cops in that situation, who seem to be at odds with each other but really aren't, their job is to bust you. So in this case, the job is to uphold capitalism and keep workers suppressed and subjugated. That's the idea. So Democrats don't really care if they... individual Democrats might care, but the people, the force behind the Democratic Party that actually gives them money, they don't really care if they win or lose, because we know that it goes back and forth. The Dems win sometimes, then people get sick of them, and then the Republicans win, and then The Republicans, out themselves as just everything that they are, and then it goes back to the Democrats. It just goes back and forth. So there's no real serious change because neither party is really doing anything for the voters in any meaningful way. Their meaningful actions are for less than 10% of the population. Everybody else, just whatever. So, yeah, that's the situation that we're in. Biden's purpose is not, that he needs to get reelected. The purpose is do what the big capitalists want and need. So will he? He's not an independent actor here. That's the thing you need to understand. So this whole fantasy of me and a dozen badasses in the squad, we're going to, block everything you do unless you do these executive orders. Again, Biden is not an independent actor. I think that a really fundamental error that a lot of these SOCDEM people make is that electoral politics is not connected to anything else. Like, it's just this huge check on society that takes place in a sort of isolated vacuum away from the wishes of the capitalist class and mass movements. And no, it's definitely a reflection of ruling class politics. The state itself as a whole is a creation of the ruling class. So previously, prior to capitalism, there was feudalism. There was the monarchy. So there was like the feudal state. And when the capitalists came to power, they tore down the feudal state. They built a new capitalist state. That's what we're talking about here. It's never going to work for working people. You can get a certain amount of reforms out of it, and then at a certain point, working people realize, hey, this can't go any further. We need to tear it down and make a new state that is a workers' government. That's socialism. And I think that Kyle Kulinski is really guilty of drinking some of the most Kool-Aid when it comes to electoral politics and getting into these just honestly embarrassing fantasies of, me and a dozen badasses are going to block Biden. But he catches himself because this is the exact same thing that I was thinking. And maybe the media would come after that left caucus. You think? I mean, that's if they actually did it. The reality that we know with AOC and the squad is they're not going to put up that kind of resistance. You know that. They will talk about it, but they're not really going to do it. And again, if somebody did, that would be getting into serious class struggle. But you're not going to get that out of progressive Democrats. You might get it out of an independent workers' party. They would actually be capable of challenging the lead Democrats and so forth. But you're not going to get that out of AOC or the squad or something like that. Let's go back to Kyle.
You should do it. But again, the criticism I have of her is that the lack of solidarity among the left caucus and the lack of willing to really buck the party establishment leads them to just, it's all talk. Like, hey, we think you should do the executive orders. Okay, and then what? Don't just give him advice. He's not going to listen to it unless you make him listen to it. And the way you make him listen to it is I'll tank everything unless you do it. How about that? And I got 12 of us. That's enough of us to block anything you want. You won't be able to name a fucking bridge by the time I'm done with you. So break out that pen and do it. That's how you got to play politics. That's how you have to do it. And they're not doing it. So on the one hand, I give her credit for acknowledging the reality that you need to bring about real change in order to win. That's obvious. And she's one of few people who say it. But to not go further and enforce that change. Now, look, is there hope? There's some hope because fact of the matter is, it was AOC, it was Jamal Bowman, I think it was Ilhan Omar and some others. It was not Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna was wrong on this one, who said, no, we're sticking to the original deal. Because remember, the Build Back Better deal was, and Build Back Better had the original Build Back Better had a lot of fantastic provisions at elder care, universal pre-K, lower prescription drug prices, extended child tax credit, it's extra $300, $400 for people who desperately need it. Ro Khanna went back on the original deal and said, I will vote for the traditional infrastructure bill without it being attached to Build Back Better. It was just a handful, what they say in the article, 6 or 7 Democrats who stuck by the original deal who were like, no, I'm not voting for your shitty traditional infrastructure bill with a bunch of corporate giveaways. It's a half-ass watered-down bill. It's like $1 trillion or something like that when we need like $5 or $6 trillion for infrastructure. Because you guys said we are going to put it together with Build Back Better to ensure that Build Back Better can pass. That was the deal. That was the deal with Manchin, with Sinema, with all the conservative corporate Democrats, the right-wing Democrats. That was the deal. You guys are now violating the deal, so no, you do not have our votes. But unfortunately, there wasn't enough of them to actually win on that front. And Pramila Jayapal and Ro Khanna and the Democrats, who were dead wrong and got made a fool of, have not come to terms with that, which tells you what? They're going to get rolled again. In every negotiation going forward, they're going to get rolled again. Because not only did they lose, they didn't lose and then look in the mirror and say, wow, I fucked that up. They lost and then acted like they didn't do anything wrong. But if the goal was Build Back Better, that's the bill we really wanted and it didn't get through, well, you're a failure. So credit to her on that front. And she does deserve credit on that front. Her and the 6 or 7 who voted the right way, because they stuck by the original deal. But the problem is, again, if you use that same tactic going forward, you need to have more solidarity. So you need like 12, 15, or whatever it is.
All right, pausing here. That was the second third of Kyle's comments. So the lack of willingness and solidarity, it's all talk. Okay, so we agree, as I was saying, they're not going to do these things. So as far as this particular thing about that was the deal and, there's a lack of solidarity or willingness among the, quote, progressive Democrats to actually stick to their guns on any of this stuff. Yeah, because there may be a few of them that at times still believe in something that they got elected to do by, the various reformist progressive coalitions that elected them. But there are others. I mean, and people like Ro Khanna in particular, are really unimpressive even by these standards. Again, what's their job? What are they really there to do? They're there to be part of a machine that protects capitalism. That's basically what they're there to do. And I think it's a misunderstanding to look at them any other way. So Kyle puts it out there. If the goal was Build Back Better, well, I don't know. Was it really? I mean, it may have been the stated goal. Was it the actual true goal? And if things like that are your goal, is, using this avenue of the Democratic Party that is completely controlled down to the county level by big money, then are you ever going to get any of this done that way? And it ends with the usual, then we would need 12 or 15 of them. Yeah, it's always something. You can add more. You're always going to need more. It's always going to be something. And somehow nothing will change. Back to Kyle.
Of people in a left caucus, a true left caucus, not the bullshit fake progressive caucus, which is a lot of them are posers, in order to really force your will and shift the Overton window. So she's right that he needs to sign the executive orders. The other thing that can and should be done is, and this isn't as good as the executive orders, that's really the silver bullet to try to give the Democrats a fighting chance. But the other thing that could be done is, so take the individual provisions of Build Back Better that are popular enough, right? That even Manchin and Sinema have said, in theory, yeah, I'm with that. So one of them would be lower prescription drug prices. Another one would be, I think, universal pre-K, although Manchin may have flipped on that now, but at a time he was for it. And propose the bills individually. Propose them individually. I mean, there's other things you could do too, because that would at least where the dividing lines are. You know who's on the right side of it. You know who's on the wrong side of it. That helps for the election. At least you're fighting for something good if you go down that path. But the other thing is, they have the ability to just increase their cracks at reconciliation. And so if you say, hey, I know we get 3 cracks at reconciliation right now, or whatever it is, but now we're going to make it 20. Well, then you can do the single bills with single policies and do it through reconciliation. As opposed to, if you do reconciliation now with just one policy, it's not enough to put one thing in there because you only get a couple chances at it, so it's like a waste. But if you do it, if you give yourself more cracks at it and then you do single policies for reconciliation and get everybody on the record, you only need 51 votes to get something through. So maybe you can get lower prescription drug prices. Maybe you can get universal pre-K. Certainly, it'll put a hell of a lot of political pressure on the likes of Manchin and Sinema because there's no way they could spin that vote to their constituents. It's one thing to do it if it's part of a giant package where you could point out one thing in the package you don't agree with and say, I'm against that, you have to drop it or I'm not voting for it. It's a totally separate thing if you just have a vote on universal pre-K or lower prescription drug prices and then you vote no on just that. That's another thing they could do. But again, Biden doesn't care. He doesn't care. He's barely alive. He's barely alive. He's not married to, social democratic change. And I don't even know, he might be so deep in his bubble that he genuinely thinks, like he said previously, the polls, they go up, they go down, stuff happens, and then it is what it is. So he doesn't even necessarily think that the polls are directly related to what he does as president, which is just insane. But anyway, AOC's warning everybody, hey man, Biden, you better do executive orders or we are beyond screwed. And my guess is, not only will he not listen, but now it will become the conventional wisdom that she's dead wrong and the opposite is true. And that is what the media does, isn't it? They're like, the way for Biden to have better poll numbers is obviously to be even more centrist and to do nothing even more and harder. Whatever corporate media says, reliably the exact opposite is the reality.
Okay, so that was the end of that, and this video really was not one of Kulinski's worst, although I feel like there is a running tendency in his commentary, which I was reminded of while watching this, that kind of the first half of the videos are usually something substantive, and then the second 50% of them, I almost always am like, why is he still talking? Anyway, so, I see some sincere engagement by Kyle with these things. He's banging his head against the wall on them, as he has been doing for years. I, as a socialist, would be willing to work in a coalition on getting some of these reforms. But this whole thing of getting lost in, getting people on the record and squeaking things through in reconciliation, I think that there's way too much faith being placed in this system. So many people do not vote. More people are not Democrat or Republican than are either Democrat or Republican. And as far as the thing about Biden, the polls go up and the polls go down, I don't think that he thinks that they're not connected. It's that he doesn't care because public opinion doesn't matter. Public input doesn't really mean anything in this system. That they know that the kind of reforms we've been talking about would be really popular and would turn a lot of people out to vote for them. Bernie Sanders won the first 3 primaries in 2020. Hugely popular stuff. And it's not because of Bernie's, personal charisma. That's definitely not the reason. But Biden knows they don't care. In fact, his job is to do the opposite. His job is to protect the system. His job is to prevent change. And if that means Democrats losing now to the Republicans, they don't care because the Republicans sure as hell aren't going to change anything either. So at the end of the day, nothing changes, which is what the people behind both parties want. There's this sort of projection that people in the Democratic Party actually want change and they're just ineffective. No, they really don't. They really don't. In fact, it panics them. They would do almost anything to block a lot of these changes. And, when we have had reforms in the past, they didn't really come from the top. They came after literal decades of intense, bloody, in many cases, violent struggle. You had things like the Coal Wars in the 1920s, biggest armed conflict in the U.S. since the Civil War. Now, there's a lot of nonviolent or less violent struggle as well. But the fact is, there's way too much emphasis being placed on electoral politics in general. And then even within that, specifically on the Democrats. Come on, can you aim any fucking lower? So that's basically my position on this whole thing. Hopefully that has been edifying for some of you, trying to tell the difference between more of a socialist perspective and the social democratic, or, as Kyle Kulinski puts it, the left populist perspective. Anyway, we got more of these clips. I'm going to try to get through them and get them up on the channel. In the meantime, what do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We'll continue the discussion there. Otherwise, thanks for listening. And thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. We still have the March screen up because it takes Patreon a couple of days to process everybody, see whose card didn't renew and stuff like that. But I appreciate the donations. If you'd like to get your name up on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialism for all. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more, whatever you see fit. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful. And the patron support has allowed me to spend a lot more time making this content than I would have been able to do without their support. So it is appreciated. I do not take it for granted. And if you like this channel, obviously thank me for doing the recording and uploading. But thank a patron too, and don't take them for granted, and do consider becoming one yourself. Otherwise, beyond that, liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting, all of that engagement helps to boost the channel, helps more people to stumble across this content. Here at Socialism for All, it is all about trying to make higher quality socialist content, not just the SOCDEM stuff, readily available for people to stumble across and become educated in. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next video.